This channel is only possible thanks to direct contributions from viewers like Kronos, Karazin Magi, Kaleidoscope Mediator, Argus, Milk, Bleed Red, Aria Reed, Christopher Welch, Jacob Sandoval, and you. If you'd like to contribute to making more videos like this possible, you can do so for as little as $1 a month on Patreon. Thanks a bunch, and I hope you enjoy the show. Hey gamers, Taz here, and today we're going to talk about Dave Cat from the angle of Karkat's character arc. Over the last couple of episodes, we've been talking about Dave's role as a knight, his relationship to his denizen, and his relationship to his upbringing and to his bro. All of which combined to generally make him struggle with a sense of futility in living up to the ideas of masculinity, heroism, and heteronormativity that he felt compelled by early in his life. Basically, Dave was raised to believe that a good man is someone who is willing to undergo hardship and inflict violence without complaining about pain or suffering. Someone that's willing to do what needs to be done, no matter the cost. In all of these ways, Karkat is a perfect foil to Dave. The only difference being that instead of being influenced into thinking that way by a specific person, Karkat's guiding star is the entirety of Alternian society. Karkat has internalized the values of Alternia and believes in them wholeheartedly, even as he feels himself completely rejected by them due to his biology, and because his candy red blood marks his status as that of a mutant, he's completely isolated from Alternian society at large, and has to essentially closet himself to avoid being culled immediately. He doesn't have any realistic prospects of living past teenagerhood. The end result is that even though Karkat grows up feeling like he needs to overcompensate for his faultiness as a mutant by living up to the troll ideal of being violent and ruthless, he actually has the least exposure to combat and violence of any troll. Both of them are pressured to live up to what is essentially an ideal of masculinity founded on violence. But where Dave was put through violence in a culture where that kind of exposure isn't normal as a part of child rearing, Karkat had the looming threat of lethal violence hanging over him his whole life, and the anxiety of knowing that he'd have no way to tell if he'd actually be okay with inflicting it. On that last point, he parallels Terezi and Vriska most strongly, who also struggle with whether or not they're actually comfortable with the culture of violence that trolls are expected to uphold. Terezi, Vriska, and Karkat all try to present themselves as people capable and comfortable with committing violence, but in all three cases this is at least somewhat false, and this is especially true for Karkat, who's so non-violent and pacifistic that Vriska says that he might cut it better as a human. It's worth mentioning that Karkat and the Signless are mutated from Line Bloods, the blood color associated with Calliope, and what I see here is Karkat struggling with feeling like he's being pulled into being like Caliborn on the outside, while holding values and instincts much more associated with Calliope on the inside. Karkat parallels both cherubs in a number of other ways, as I've documented in at least one other video, and this tension between opposites is actually perfectly emblematic of someone whose denizen might be Abraxas. Abraxas being the Gnostic deity associated with the world of ideas or imagination, and usually depicted with its bottom half represented by two serpents pulling in two different directions, much as Calliope and Caliborn pull in two different directions throughout the story of Homestuck, crafting the story through their power struggle. In Gnosticism, Abraxas is also the entity that sends Christ into the world, associating it in Homestuck with the Sufferer and Karkat, Karkat playing the role of the second coming of Christ, said to come with the advent of the end of the world, just as his birth heralds the death of Alternia. This brings us to how I see Karkat's class-spect behavior. Like Dave, Karkat is a knight. But not only is Karkat a knight of blood, an aspect associated with relationships, bonds, and commitments, his ancestor is a seer. And while Karkat doesn't deliberately look up to his ancestor, like, say, Vriska or Terezi, and so this aspect of his character is somewhat understated, I do think he ends up taking on some seer traits, whether you want to view that as just an accident, or as a kind of karmic consequence of his relationship to his ancestor. So, Dave is someone who uses his aspect very consciously and directly, pretty much from the get-go. He's support-oriented and passive in the sense that he uses his powers to uplift his friends and make them more powerful, but when he does engage in combat, he does use his aspect as an offensive tool. And this isn't really something Karkat does at all. Except for one very specific scenario, he's pretty useless in combat, and it's not actually his go-to solution for solving his problems. Even though he does talk about combat and violence a lot as a way to threaten and instigate what he wants in conversation. But that's the key. Conversation and speech are the main tools that Karkat uses in order to achieve his objectives. Vriska even comments on how he was able to successfully keep the trolls organized around a common purpose, despite their social group being primed to break down and kill each other. Karkat's strengths are in relationship management and organizing. But even more than in a leadership role, Karkat's real importance is just how he interacts with the story of Homestuck. Karkat's interaction with the story actually doesn't have much impact on the plot itself. Instead, it's mostly concerned with his relationships with other people and his ability to help others navigate their relationships to each other. But particularly that former. Karkat's relationship with his close friends can be summed up as Karkat first saying, "I hate you, you suck," then, "Oh wait, oh shit, what happened to you?" and then, "Oh god, no, 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 no." In his simplest form, Karkat can be more or less classified as a tsundere, harsh and abrasive on the outside, soft and caring within. Much later in Act 6, this is actually a designation that Caliborn applies to Karkat, specifically with regards to his relationship with Dave. Caliborn's view of Karkat plays into this too, deliberately feminizing him in order to make his homosexual shipping of Dave and Karkat more palatable to him, by making it more surface-level heterosexual. This is also, uncomfortably, something Dirk does in the epilogues, which is one of the stronger pieces of evidence that his ascension to the Ultimate Self has exposed Dirk to being influenced by entities like Caliborn, Lord English, and Doc Scratch. In retrospect, what strikes me is how, relative to his popularity back at the height of the fandom, Karkat, even more than most of the characters, has fallen relatively out of grace with the fandom, much like Homestuck's canon itself. He's still celebrated by shipping fans, but a large chunk of the fandom mourns his arc as an example of Homestuck's missed potential, because Karkat's popularity back then came with strings attached, you know? The celebration of Karkat always came attached to the hype for Homestuck proper. The way possibility always seemed to be around the corner, and it seemed like every arc was headed in an increasingly exciting and interesting direction. For Karkat in particular, there was always a sense that his relative powerlessness was temporary, a burden to be lifted when his arc finally reached its climax and he tapped into his real shit. When will he go god tier? When will he get blood powers? When will he start fucking shit up and being a badass like the other kids? And I don't fault anyone for wanting to see Karkat get more obvious superpowers. I'm the first to admit it'd be cool and cathartic as hell. And punished rebellion leader Karkat in the epilogues and Homestuck 2 is one of my favorite parts of that particular timeline exploration of the post-canon universe. But I think arguing that Karkat is a good character in the comic because his arc isn't over, actually, and he could get cool down the line, would be missing the point. Karkat's arc is about how he was always cool and powerful, it's just that his power manifested in ways we aren't really conditioned to see as power, which I think is kind of a shame, because Karkat used his powers of blood to nullify the threat of the only enemy in Collide that literally nobody else could have stopped otherwise. Clover's skill is his infinite luck, and literally no one in the cast was aware of that. Maybe Vriska could have stopped him by stealing his luck if she knew what he was doing, but Vriska wasn't there, and no one else in the cast was equipped to deal with him. It would have actually been really easy for Clover to screw everything up for everybody simply by being an unstoppable distraction if he'd got into the right place and time. But that didn't happen because the luckiest outcome in the field of battle for a horny guy like Clover is finding a new romantic interest, and by unwittingly providing that, Karkat was able to make a crucial difference no one else could have made. Everyone has an important job to do. Of course, stopping Clover is far from the most important thing Karkat did with his blood powers. Dave's own narrative victory, his coping with his childhood abuse, and his escape from Caliborn's perverse, demanding gaze only happens because of Karkat. Dave tells us he was only able to find his way out of the prison his mind was trapped in because he started spending time with the people who cared about him. And nobody gave Dave more care or time than Karkat, who spent the 3-year meteor journey basically lashed to his hip. This isn't even about Karkat deconstructing human sexuality or tearing into bro or anything like that, even though it's true that Karkat's exploration of his feelings of romance as existing outside of the Quadrant system make him a very good analog for troll queerness, and there is a certain beauty to the idea of the two of them using their different cultural frames of references to help each other through exploring those feelings together. Growing up is hard, especially when the people who were supposed to care about you didn't, and sometimes the best thing you can do for someone dealing with that is to just be a friend. Blood is essentially the nakama aspect as much as the shipping aspect, if we're dealing with fandom tropes. It's about the power of being able to care about someone, being willing to invest in someone, showing up and staying close and continuing to give a shit even when it's difficult. And that concept has always been really important to me because I've been through what Dave went through. I've been in that dark place where you feel unwanted and unloved, broken and limping, feeling rejected by God and Father and the world itself, feeling rotten about yourself to the core. And I can't really think of many things nobler than sticking by someone who is going through that. I definitely can't think of gestures that have personally meant more to me. The experience Dave is describing is pretty real to me, and to many, and I can't help but wonder how much better off we'd all be if everyone gave that experience the respect I feel it warrants. I don't think it's a coincidence that every true source of evil in Homestuck is very larger than life, yet a very unique and solitary force. So the evil don't have friends. They have tools and accomplices to be exploited, worked with, and disposed of as is convenient. And for all their glory and impact, capital H heroes aren't totally different. Their hearts might be in the right place, but often they're too busy to dive into the messy and complex problems that come with their own feelings, or that of the people in their lives. So they end up leaving other people, and big parts of themselves, behind. Alpha, Rose, and Dave were the noble last stands of humanity's rebellion, but you don't really get the sense that they could rely on each other like our Rose and Dave do. Grandpa and Bro did their parts to help salvage the world, but both were terrible fathers who left their children feeling wounded and unwanted. Vriska is Vriska, and what more is there to say there? In his last Pesterlog, Karkat is quite excited to give a speech, but it has more weight than is immediately apparent. Again, Karkat is the second coming of a prophet, an archetype strongly associated with giving speeches and communicating ideas in general. And the events about to unfold are those that will finally fulfill the sufferer's prophetic sermons, and set Trollkind free from the blight of Lord English. This is a moment Karkat's life was building to strange eons before Karkat's life even began. But it doesn't actually turn out to be a speech to a crowd of soldiers ready to fight and die under his command. Instead, it's a speech he delivers alone, a quirk he picked up from his best friend and boyfriend's habit of privately rambling to himself. And all it turns out to be is a declaration of empathy and a hope for what's next. Once upon a time, Karkat would have conceived of this fight as the maximal culmination of his desire to lead, fight, and conquer, the ultimate battleground on which to prove himself victorious. But here and now, he isn't thinking about that. What we get instead is a rambling look at how knowing Dave this long has changed Karkat. A glimpse into how, in helping Dave chase off the shadows Lord English cast on his heart, Karkat's come a long way in breaking the shackles in his own mind, too. When everyone else is thinking about the present, preparing for the fight that lays immediately ahead, it's Karkat alone that, while gazing at the star that marks Lord English's dominion over their reality, gives voice to the promise of the future that exists beyond this fight. Karkat doesn't care about the glory the battle will bring Dave or how cool he'll get to be. He's just worried about the moments that will come after the battle, when it's time to lick their wounds and heal. When that time comes, he just wants Dave to be okay. Because to us, Collide was a climax, but to Karkat it's just the last obstacle on the horizon, you know? After this, there's supposed to be peace, and growth, and freedom to play and heal. After this, he wants to hang out with Dave again. After this, he wants to help bring a world into being, and share it with his friends. You know, a lot of the time, I look out the news or out the window nowadays, and I feel deeply, deeply scared. The world often feels like it's turning into a really ugly place, where a great battlefield between irreconcilable desires is inevitable. Truth be told, to me it feels like the fight is already here and has already smashed my life to pieces. And everywhere I turn, it seems like most are ready and raring to fight some more, without a care for the bloodied and wounded. And I'm just not. I don't want to fight. I just want a world where me and my friends can be happy, where there's a future we can all look forward to together, where my family and my loved ones can be safe. So it really matters to me that this is the last message Karkat has to give to us. That the last beat in his story isn't some overcomplicated statement of ideology or some profound moment of anime glory, but just the simple warmth of looking out for a friend. Whatever else can be said about Homestuck as it stands right now, I think that message is really important. I think it's really good. Not enough people are thinking like that right now, I think. And if they are, they sure aren't talking about it much. So I'm really glad that Karkat's written the way he is here. Honestly, in times like these, I think we could all do with going back to simpler lessons in storytelling sometimes. Like the message that we're all doing the work of society together, and we're all stuck together, whether we like it or not. And if me putting my thoughts out there can help shift our collective inertia 1 centimeter in that direction, then I feel like I kinda have to, don't I? I feel like I owe it to myself. And to you. So hey, whoever you are, whether you like what I'm putting out here or not, I hope you're okay. Thanks for watching. Until next time, keep rising. Huge thanks go out to my patrons for making this video possible. If you want to help support the channel and come join us at our awesome and growing Discord community, feel free to join us for as little as $1 a month. You can also find me on the r/Hiveswap Reddit and Discord. That's all for now, so thank you again, and as always, keep rising.